Welcome to this week's episode of Voices in Digital Theology, a series of interviews in which we introduce researchers in the field of theology and digitality. And I'm Jonas Kjellberg, and with me is my co-host, Catherine Schmidt, lecturer at Molloy College in New York. Hi, Catherine, really good to see you again.
Jonas. Hey, Jonas.
Today we have the pleasure of having Erkki Sutinen with us, and he's a professor in computer science and is currently heading up the Namibia campus of Turku University, which is a Finnish university. He's also an ordained priest in the Church of Finland, and he is a wonderful human being. So it's so good to have you with us. I would like to start by asking a little bit about your background and what brought you to computer science to begin with in the first place.
Okay, thanks a lot. Very nice to be part of this exercise. And actually, when I went to study the University of Helsinki, I was very young, I was at the age of 17. So I went to study mathematics, but then of course you needed to also, decide on your minor studies. And since I haven't really known anything about computers, that was like 1977. So I was thinking that it would make sense, to study something that you don't have a clue of. So it was just, like going to an open field. Mm. And so I was just curious, and it turned out to be quite a nice choice, because computer science is very open, and you can do practically anything with computers, and there are more ways to come. And so yeah, that was the. But I started with mathematics, so I first did like my master degree in mathematics, and then I was studying theology also at the side, and then I did my PhD in computer science a bit later. So I was working a few years at the Finnish Evangelical Lutheran Mission, for different system design and those sort of things. And then, I went back to the university. But then, my computer science PhD was about string algorithms in the 1990s. And it was like about approximate pattern matching. So, and it was very much about technologies, for example, Google now uses, for finding matches in a vast amount of data. So then it was like a rising field, and that also was, but it was pretty theoretical, like algorithmic research.
Erkki, I think that when most people hear that, at least in my context, they might think about those two fields as being very different. Was that the case for the people around you? Like, were you kind of rare in studying like these kind of two different things?
Well, yes, I think that nowadays, maybe we are really even struggling. We talk about multidisciplinarity, but it just means that, like we have these sort of silos of different disciplines.
Right.
So right. I rather actually would like to talk about non-disciplinary work, so that, we basically focus on problems, and then we don't exercise any discipline there, but we exercise freedom and liberty. And, that means actually creativity. So to put these different things, to talk with each other. I think that, seriously also, like, it's interesting that, theology and computer science, as disciplines or as approaches, I think they also have quite a lot, in common, because, theology is very much about expressing faith in a kind of intellectual way, how you can formulate like your theology. How you can express it, so that you can discuss it, or you can do dialogue or something like that. So you kind of represent faith, and then computer science is about representing information, representing data in a meaningful way and processing it. So it also means actually that you need to understand the knowledge or information or data that you are processing, and then you need to represent it in a form that you can process it. So actually in computer science we talk about like three different levels. We talk about syntax, which is the structure, and then we talk about semantics, so what is the meaning of the structures, and then we talk about pragmatism, like what is meanings, how do they work with the reality. I think that in theology we also can talk about like these different levels. We talk about the structure of theology, the structure of faith, the semantics of faith, and then what the faith actually means in practice and in real life. So I mean, there are quite a lot, but they have like different aspects. And then I think that another thing which might be actually quite common is that in computer science we are interested when we work on representations. So we actually construct representations. And we want to identify the best representations, maybe the most effective representations or functional or meaningful representations. And I think that this is maybe something that theology recently has a little bit forgotten about. I think that, much of theology is understood as a more like analytical field, or, evaluating or, interpreting, not that much about constructing. And I think that, this sort of constructive or design approach would be quite important. If you think of like early theology or apologetics, or if you think of like Reformation. So it was maybe not that much about analyzing like what people used to say or something like that, but you needed to construct your message in a way that, makes sense. So there are lots of these things, and I think that, like the interaction is quite fruitful for both, actually fields.
So, Erkki, you've been talking about digital theology as design. Would you be able to kind of explain what you mean with that?
Yes. Well, design, of course, always means that you create a solution to an identified problem or a challenge, and you make a design that is also like aesthetically pleasing, or functional, so that it serves the purpose. And like by aesthetics, if you go back to the etymology of aesthetics, so it means that it touches you with all your senses. So you need to come up, with that sort of like solution. And I think that I'm quite a lot referring to Paul Tillich and his method of correlation. And he basically claims that the theologian is actually should exercise always this method of correlation. So that theologian needs to understand an existentially meaningful or pressing challenge in the society, like explore the society. And then like when after understanding this, or maybe during the process of understanding, is to basically like correlate that to his or her understanding or interpretation of theology. So it's basically all the time it's kind of designing solutions, like theological solutions to existential problems. So, and I think that this sort of idea of design is quite interesting. So you can even think that and then even if you go like to co-design, so it's not only like, say a clergy or, like someone who is a teacher at the church should only, craft these designs. But when we talk about co-design, it's a kind of exercise that you do together with your, community of faith, or with your church, or with your congregation. So it's kind of, joint exercise. I think that, just maybe a week ago, I think was it the president of the European Union or whoever, I'm not very good at all these titles, but anyway, he said that, like maybe something that, what would be Europe's, mission for this time is actually to set up a new Bauhaus movement. And we all know that Bauhaus actually was a design movement, a design school, like in 1920s in Germany. And it basically like transformed the whole idea of design. And it was very much designing in real life context. And so I think that, like when we do theology, in congregation or in communities of faith, so we basically design, this solution. And it's even like, if you think take it back to the theology of creation. So it's something like, I think that it's very close to creation. It's kind of, participating in God's creation, in the contemporary environment.
I think this, yeah, I think this is something. So what attracts me to this, I mean, I'm going to get to kind of what scares me about it in a second, but what attracts me to this is this idea of creativity. And I think that for many people, they don't realize how much creativity actually goes into constructing like a digital platform or something like that. They tend to see it as very maybe like determined or something like that. So this leads to my question is what do you say to somebody like me who's a theologian but is terrified of the sort of like I would say the technical aspects? Like, do you think that theologians like myself need to kind of learn the more technical aspects of basically what I'm studying?
Yeah. Thanks. This is very exciting question, because I think that, we talk too much about like needs-based design. So we think that, like we need to, we must, or, we must create solutions to some sort of identified need. And usually someone else is identifying the needs. Like if you think of the global south, think that, like there are this sort of, needs that, people need to, it's kind of a little bit like fixing the house mentality. But I think that, the most important thing, from if you will, like in this case, like the users, is to know about the demands, what they like subjectively demand, what kind of new expectations they have. But also at the same time, learning to know, like, what are the opportunities of the technology. So what you can do actually with technology.
Right.
Because if you don't know that, so you can't expect. I mean, maybe you expect too much, or usually too little. And I think that, that's when we talk about co-design. So we need to have people who actually, not just meet for an hour for an interview, but actually learn to play with technology, and like, so that, you can actually see. I remember in Tanzania, we were working, with teachers, and we were teaching like robotics, like just basic robotics. And these teachers who were not really like computer scientists, they really said that, like learning to code a robot is so important, because then you can actually see how, like your code actually would work. You get like feedback. You understand how it works. You sort of understand the inner soul of the processor, if you will, a little bit like theological, phrase. But I think this is, and just the other day, like last Friday, we visited a very, very advanced, school, special school here. It's called like Integrate. It's actually nowadays called Integrate Sensory Center. So, the idea of that whole learning environment is actually to first of all integrate, and, then see like, how technology helps people with, say, autism to communicate. And now we are going to set like 3 computer science students there to actually live and work in that special sensory center, or integrate sensory center, to actually work with say autists, to see like, what really, how they can express, their ideas, how they can communicate. And I think this is very much the same, with digital theology or theologians, like how to make use of this environment, the digital tools, actually to be better to communicate and express. But it's a process, and I think that, when we talk about, maybe we could say that digital theology could be sort of a subfield or a specialization for theologians. And I think that, or maybe, and also computer scientists. So both of these people need to go out of the comfort zone and, learn a little bit of each other's, fields.
Right.
Also to challenge.
Yeah.
And it's not hard, you need to have this, what is called like growth mindset, not like fixed mindset. So when you like open up and you see that, as a theologian, maybe we can talk about like growth mindset in digital theology for both computer scientists and theologians. It's something like you need to, and you can grow.
Yeah.
So what do you think theology brings to computer science then?
Yes, no, I think that, computer science always lives from challenges and from problems. And I think that, like if you think, for example, just from the information point of view, like there has been quite a big field of affective computing or opinion mining or like how you understand sentiments or something like that. So which is of course not like very binary thing, like how you feel or what your emotions are. And I think that, when we think of like, if you will, like theological or faith oriented or faith related information. So it's about knowledge, but it's also about emotions, but it's also about like spiritual, experiences. So this is like a very different kind of, content, that we somehow, are processing. And of course, it is also like when we think of like, because I mean, there are two ways to apply computers, or basically, I mean that you can automate, the current understanding or current processes, like you see that, okay, this is a worship, and okay, let's digitalize the worship. But the other thing is that which is more like a radical, way of using technology, so that you actually rethink what's behind the worship, and like you start sort of de-assembling it somehow, make it into pieces, and see like what it actually is, what it should be, and then you start from the beginning, so you sort of question it. And I think we recently wrote a paper on how to integrate theology into engineering education, and it's actually going to be presented like in Uppsala in the main or major engineering education conference, like Frontiers in Education, after 2 weeks. And it got pretty, excited reviews and responses. It's something like, first of all, there are a lot of like challenges nowadays, which actually require theological understanding. If you think of like, using computers in very challenging environments, or in global, environments where, users are representing a very vast range or spectrum of faiths and so. But also when we talk about the, so I mean, there are a lot of ethical issues as well, of course. I mean, that's another thing. But also just yesterday, I was at another conversation that was organized by IIT Bombay, and my and that was like, the conversation was called like Kavi's Corner. Kavi Arya is a professor at IIT Bombay, and he's actually there to reform engineering education. And I was one of these people that was invited to conversation. The other one was a president of the College of Technology and Engineering in Bhutan. And like the whole idea of this series of conversation is to open up the professional profile of engineers in India, because out of graduated engineers, 75% in India are unemployable. So only 25% are engineers who can actually make a difference. And it was quite interesting that when Prof Arya introduced me to the audience of maybe 300 or 400 young engineers, so he was telling a little bit about my background, but he said that the most exciting thing is that Erkki is working on digital theology, and he is an ordained Lutheran priest. And and it was quite amazing, because they said that I mean, we can talk about technical issues, but like what, how technology can help people to grow, to find their own identities, and how they can serve the world, how they can make a difference in the world. And this is very much a theological question as well. Yeah. So I mean, there are lots of these sort of issues, and now I see that I just recently wrote the first manuscript for a book on digital theology from computer science point of view, and I gave it to 2 of my atheist colleagues or students to read, and they were very, very excited. I mean, they were very excited of the whole topic. So it's also kind of interesting that it's not only like just because it may be at the first look it's far away from technology. But I think that this is something that is badly demanded these days.
Erkki, do you think that there's something about, I guess game design, or sort of digital game design, can kind of fit under computer science in some ways? Do you think that there's something that digital game design has figured out that actually is a nice entry point for some of the things that you're talking about? Does game design kind of do some of the intersectional work that you're talking about?
Yeah, well, I think that certainly it does, like if you think like in game design, you have like these different levels of creating the game mechanics and
Yeah.
then game dynamics and then the gameplay. And actually, just with one of my PhD students, we are actually now looking into how you can create a game for like contextualized theology.
Yeah.
Like for example, you say that you need to understand what people actually are thinking in a certain context or community. So actually, like designing a game to understand the environment, because when you create the mechanics, you really need to understand the rules, if you will, of the society or the context. So you need to really explore. And I think that's very much, and then when you do the dynamics, so that's also computer science challenge, because you need to see like how you can play, with the mechanics, how you can make, how you can, implement it in that way that it actually supports this gameplay.
Yeah.
And yes, and also, yeah, and maybe even like if you think like of interfaith dialogue, so you can even understand that as a kind of game, like where you have like different understandings, maybe like how you conceptualize faith, maybe also how another faith in the dialogue can sort of enrich or be corrective to your own maybe reduced or limited understanding or experience of your own faith, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting.
Hmm.
You said something before that I think kind of gets to our question. One of the questions that we're trying to ask all of our voices in digital theology, which is, what should be the relationship, or what do you think about the relationship between digital theology and a kind of, traditional academic theology? So what does that look like when you think about it? And your perspective is so unique because you've already said something about sort of non-disciplinary. So can you maybe tell us a little bit more about how we kind of see ourselves in the academy, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I think that computer science grew up actually as maybe a kind of troublemaker or rebellion, because like if you think of one of the main or grand, maybe grand computer scientist or grand old men of computer science, Donald E. Noor. Actually, he's also a very practicing Lutheran layman in his church. So he said that it was the fascination of because he was originally a mathematician, but it was a fascination of computer science, the whole world of algorithms that just drew him to this area to do something different. But he also says that the future of computer science is no more in the core of computer science. It actually happens, in the periphery, when computer science meets with other disciplines. Like if you think of like computer science meeting with biology. Yeah. So, it led to the rise of biocomputing and all this sort of stuff and computational biology, and we can see it like that, right? So it sort of helps, computer science also to continuous renewal. But so it was a little bit like a troublemaker from since its beginning. And I think that we need this sort of troublemaker and troublemaking also in theology. I think that like maybe, and I have just only studied a bit of theology to that extent that I was ordained a priest, but pastor. But I think that we see a little bit like stagnate. We see theology as a bit like stagnated field. Somehow maybe a bit shy also, and of course there is all these questions about humanities. What is the economic value of humanities?
Right.
And I would like to go into that discussion, but I think that rather than defending, is maybe better to attack. And I think that like this digital theology can be a new way also for actually going even to earlier times than this traditional or conventional theology, actually to the very origins of theological exercises and theological work, and see that it's something like making faith understandable or communicatable or something like that. And you use all possible tools, and one of the key tools for our society, information society or imagination society, is the digital technology. And I think that probably also what it will bring, or what it will remind of. I think that it will remind of this constructive mission of theology, that it's not only like analyzing what others have said and go to all these like endless fights about concepts. I think that we can also promote a little bit more fluid understanding of concepts, and just to release, relax maybe also, and have another field to sort of cross-fertilize theology. I think that that's so I think that there is a big mission, for digital theology, and I think that this sort of constructive approach of computer science is probably there to help it.
Yeah,
I think it's kind of liberation movement, for theology as well, So.
Yeah. What's some of the areas that you think digital theology should be exploring in the coming years?
Yes. I think that there are lots of these, but I think that one of the things is that that how it renews, the way that faith is expressed but also exercised. If you think of, for example, like Christian communities or churches. So when we talk about how they, like if you think of the leadership or management of churches, it's still very much like top down, it's very hierarchical. And if you on the other hand talk about like body of Christ, that's a very dynamic, organ, if you will. So I think that, that's maybe one of the very, very exciting things. To do, how we make use of crowdsourcing, platforms to actually get people's voices heard, and also to make a difference, and to contribute and influence. So I think that's very, very, very exciting. It's maybe also something like like how maybe this sort of traditional top-down or this sort of authoritarian or hierarchical management or structure, how does it meet with this sort of bottom-up movement, and how we can do that. Another thing, of course, is that for example, like where do you meet? Now during the corona pandemic, so we have seen that we can't really meet face to face. But on the other hand, I think that meeting digitally can be like much more meaningful and much more touching, even a much more aesthetic experience than just being in a church next to each other, right, next to a person that you don't really know, or you might not even like. So but in this way we don't that doesn't trouble so much, and maybe also this sort of like the all sensory encounter, like how can we really like not only like use our visuals or orals, but we can also like touch or smell or taste other, maybe not taste that, I don't know, but but anyway, so it's like like feeling the true community. I mean, that's another. And then maybe also the aspect of universal church, or maybe the cosmic church, so that it's the church of the whole creation, like it's I mean, this sort of like local church is, of course, I mean, it's one thing, but now that people might feel that like their closest people are not necessarily who are like physically closest, but some in some other way. So I think that now that's another thing. I would say that if you think of the classic fields of theology, so if you think of systematic theology or exegetics or practical theology or church history. For example, if you think of church history, so why not to talk about church futurology? And I think that would also be kind of interesting, because I mean, if you think like, okay, there are many historical books in the Bible, but there are also like, if you will, if you think of eschatology, so you might also talk about like relations to future studies, like what we need to become to, you know, and you know, these sort of things. So I would say that, but I think again that, you know, it all starts from challenges. So I think that that it basically goes down to these communities in real life, and you know, but we should be very, very open in identifying, you know, these communities. It's not and like for example, when I'm now working with a couple of very talented Namibian students and some very talented students in Finland. So it still takes some time to get these people to work together, you know, but I think that there is such and so much that you can learn from these sort of encounters. So, and of course there are theological questions like this online Holy Communion or online sacraments. But then, you know, you go back to the understanding of what is reality. I mean, you can't, you know, say that there is a physical reality and digital reality, because even this is physical. I mean, this is certainly non-physical that I'm communicating with you. I mean, there are electrons or whatever, you know, particles or, you know, there. So it's very much the same physical reality. So if we think that, that, you know, like the sacrament would only be valid, you know, if it's like 20 centimeters or less, you know, from somewhere, you know, that's a very stupid way to think of God's presence, you know, or presence of Christ. That,
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't, maybe we can ask him, like, would 20 or 30 centimeters be better than something else? But, you know, like we also need to talk, so we talk about, like, you know, like understanding of reality as well. So it's all these sort of things. And then we go further to quantum computing or all these new kinds of new models of computation. Or then we think of imagination aids. All these will come with very, very exciting challenges. And I think that it reminds that, you know, we need to choose whether we want to defend what used to be, or whether we are like ready to jump into sort of unexplored terrain that we don't know. And I mean that if we don't have the courage to get to new terrains, which also God has created, so that's very, very strange. I think that it's really very strange. So I think that it's just a kind of opening and welcome to new exciting fields of study. And not to study, but study which is like goes hand in hand in making a difference in this world. So.
Well, that sounds like an excellent point to end, actually.
Yeah, I was going to say, we probably shouldn't mess with that because that was some really good theology going on.
Yeah, exactly. So, Erkki, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
And we obviously look forward to, you know, being involved with whatever you do in the future. Look forward to a more future-orientated theology.
I'm looking forward to theologians being on the attack, personally. That's what I'm looking forward to. So we'll see what happens. Thank you so much, Erkki.
Thank you very much, both of you. Okay, and welcome to here to Namibia.